and instructors know which to use is definitely going to help stabilize things. But I completely agree with you. It's flourishing, I think, and yeah, I think it's getting the good of the pandemic. This is it. It's reaching out to people and saying edtech is really important now. So completely agree. Okay, going away from edtech and going to traditional approaches. Stephanie, what do you think? Why do you think we need labs in our lives? So in your courses, if labs are very expensive and not all universities and departments can afford them, some universities, for example, in our countries or Africa, cannot even afford having a lab. So can we just do without labs at all? Or why do you think labs are important?
Well, for the course where I'm teaching in on the stratified medicine, so students are trained to be biologists and bioinformaticians. So it means they need to know about the biology, how you do the experiments on the bench, to be able to interpret the data and to make sense of them. And then you need to analyze using the computer, etc. So having the whole reading and knowledge of this expertise, I think, is very important for them. And I think your question was about, can we go all virtual, or do we just need to do the actual real lab? If you see what I mean. If it was before the pandemic, I would have told you, I think we need to go on the real lab. You need to touch a pipette to know what you have to do and where we have to go, etc. You need to get the feeling of your experiments to understand it. You need to do it for once. I think these still need to be here. And as you said, all experiments are not easily affordable for every university. They can be more or less expensive. You cannot do everything. So I think if you have the choice to be able to pick some experiment that you can do in the lab that will be simple, just easy to introduce the students to the material, how it works, how to organize your bench, how to go there, and then maybe do some more complicated one that would be more expensive, etc., online via virtual lab. I think it would be a way to combine the two expertise and tools, and to have a complementary training there, completely complementary. I think that's the way I would go now. Yeah.
Love your opinion. Definitely, it makes a lot of sense, and I guess we can listen more and hear Chris' insights on that as well, to see different perspectives. Chris, can you share with us your insights on this? Why do you need labs in your work with your students, and yourself? You're a PhD student, so why do you need labs in the science courses?
Okay, so I'll first say, as a PhD student, you really need to figure out what you're doing, and labs are practical in the sense that you actually have your hands on the material, on the pipette, doing whatever you need to do. I work in molecular biology, so I need to know how to use these tools in order to succeed. I don't think I'd be able to be here if I was not participating in a lab course. I do, however, agree that there are some aspects that can be very expensive, especially in my field, in the molecular biology field. There are some techniques that would be better if they were online, which would save a lot of time, a lot of money, and still educate the students.
I think this is so a follow-up for you, Chris, related to this, because you said part of the answer for the next question. So I'm really interested to know more. So you think when you go to the real lab, did you have like certain aspects you were thinking about that you wanted your students to do, or you wanted to do in a real lab, but you couldn't? Like, is there any specific aspect you were thinking that made you think, okay, what if I had this aspect in the real lab, but it wasn't there?
Okay, so I was teaching, for context, I'm teaching a biotechnology course, so it is a molecular biology course. And then in terms of something in person that they weren't able to really grasp, because either we just didn't have the materials or it was just way too expensive. There are a lot of things. There are a lot of bacteria related work that can be a huge safety risk if people aren't properly trained, that you can't really work on, but you could facilitate learning if you do it from what PraxiLab did from an online standpoint. That was definitely a lot easier for me, and I felt a lot safer doing that this semester.
Amazing. So we take from Chris the main point that was safety. And I think Stephanie, when she was talking, she was saying a very important point, which is, I loved as well, when she said, let's pick two things. So we can pick specific experiments to do in real lab and then pick others to do in virtual labs if we cannot afford them or safety. So Stephanie, do you have, other than safety or lab experiments that we cannot do at all, do you think there are any other aspects that are missing from the real labs that would let us go towards the virtual labs?
No, well, definitely the safety and the cost are the main one.
Okay.
And the time. At the end of the day, when you look at those big experiments, like the DNA sequencing, for instance, it's quite a long one. So but having a virtual lab there allows you to show the complexity of the experiments that you have to do at the bench. And you could pause it, you won't do that in the lab, never, but you could go bits by bits there and move on there. So this can help definitely the learning for the student, I think, when you have big stuff like that, yeah. And I never had that, I was never able to do that in the real lab anyway, for sure, for all those reasons, because no time, because no money, because etc.
This is interesting. So it's like the ability for students to stop at certain point and continue and stop and do it several times. This is another thing that you were thinking.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I guess also by being virtual like that, well, that's what I was realizing by doing it online, is that so you can pause your virtual experiments, obviously. And you can see where the students are struggling a bit, where you can try to pause it and try to re-explain each steps, why it's important, why you have to do that, you need to do that way, etc. And this is the way to re-explain, reinforce the knowledge there, I think, as well.
Okay, so stopping for a certain period to explain something and then returning back, and that's difficulty you have because of the time constraint.
Yeah.
You got it. Okay, thank you for that, for sharing that. So going back to Carla, most of your work is in the UK, but I definitely know that you're also in other organizations or sharing your knowledge in different parts of the world. Can you tell us now how you see the government, and if in the UK or in different places, how you see the government is putting investment or focusing their attention now in virtual labs? Do you think there's any progress in this part?
I think it depends a little bit where you are. So if you look at, if I look at school context where, some countries are starting to introduce virtual labs and virtual reality for a variety of subjects, not even just labs. But, in certain Asian countries, virtual realities, like in school, is zooming ahead. And the technology is definitely there, even in primary school, where some virtual reality technology providers are actually advising not to do it with the littlest kids, but to start at the age of 13, for instance, in their kind of instruction manuals and things. And then you have kind of companies, like there's one in the UK that's gone, it's called Class VR. And basically it's not just about labs or science, but it's about introducing VR. And also they've been quite clever, because the goggles they've produced, which are bespoke, also have the ability to use AR. So there's a particular component in the goggles, so you don't have to go fully VR, but you can also use AR, which in a lot of cases makes the technology also much cheaper, and also give teachers tools to kind of maybe develop little AR experiments or applications. Like, for instance, if a physics teacher wants to kind of explain motion, or how the impact affects you with AR, with augmented reality, you can do that reasonably easily, and kids can actually feel it on their phone. So those kind of companies are starting to emerge. At a policy level, though, I think there's a long way to go. I think it's more at sort of the school level that people decide to implement this. And of course, depending what kind of school system and school ecosystems you're in, you may have the money to do this, or you don't have the money to do this. But I certainly see sort of in East Asia that there's a really strong innovation drive, and in some Arab countries as well, the really strong innovation drive, which does include VR. And of course, the VR thing, like Stephanie highlighted, it does wonderful things, you know. And in some cases, the fact that you can stop, you can reflect on the process that you've just been through, you can try and unravel it for yourself if you haven't quite understood it. You can actually, you know, be a bit scared about doing an experiment in a lab with all your kids in the classroom because it might explode, right? So you can explode it as many times as you like till you get it. But at the same time, you know, there's a researcher in Australia who's doing quite a lot of research on VR in schools, and she's done her name is Erica Southgate, and she's done some sort of pilot studies in two remote schools or schools in socio-economic poor environments. Like one is a school where there are a lot of Aboriginal kids, and one is a school in what they call the lumber country in Australia. So it's quite remote, and it's a kind of, they both were fairly small schools with very little resources. And the experiments or the pilots have been quite revealing because, for instance, the girls didn't like to put on the goggles in one school because everything went, you know, they couldn't sort of engage with the real world anymore. And they couldn't see what the other girls or boys would be thinking about them. And they found that really, really difficult. So there's those aspects that obviously come into account. And of course, in terms of learning progress for quite a lot of kids, they progress their learning much faster than the teachers were expecting. But for other kids who didn't really quite take to it, they found it not quite as effective. So, you know, you have to take the learner into account. But, you know, if you look at it contextually, and, you know, like you were saying earlier, if you haven't got budgets for a lab in a school, you know, let's do at least something virtual, because otherwise kids don't get access to you know, a certain amount of subjects or even, you know, cross curricular learning at all. So it's really important that we don't rule VR out in schools, and policymakers should start looking at it. But it's new, certainly in schools. Universities, I think, are sort of a bit of a different kettle of fish. Yeah.
Thank you, Carla, for sharing this. This has been very insightful. I completely agree, and especially the last part when you talked about the girls not wanting to put the VR, the goggles. I think a lot of studies are actually not optimistic. I'm not saying optimistic, but this is why, for example, we at PraxiLabs, we didn't want to go with this VR and goggles yet, because a lot of studies are thinking it's not yet into education, especially because you lose the engagement with the outer space, with everything happening around you, especially the instructor cannot even see what you're doing, cannot help you. So I think
exactly. And the other thing also is that, you know, some people can't use goggles at all. It gives them motion sickness. I'm one of them for a start. You know, if I put a pair of VR goggles on, I get really, really sick. So, and I know the sort of resolution and the technology and the sort of the motion tracking and stuff is getting much better with the new generation of technology. But, you know, that's high-end technology. That's not technology that's affordable for everyone, and it still doesn't solve motion sickness for everyone either. So there are issues that have to be addressed.
And that's why going maybe with the mixed reality and AR would be a better option so far. So yeah, completely agree. So I'm going to take Stephanie's opinion now about something very important. Stephanie, when was the first time you heard about the virtual labs? Like the first time you heard the term, and what was your impression then? Like, what are the thoughts that came to your mind?
Well, to be honest, I did look for virtual lab because of the pandemic. That's what I did look for, that because of the lockdown. And so I didn't really look at it before. I mean, yeah, maybe just to try to run experiments like virtual PCR on jail where your primary would go, etc. But it's not very much there. Yeah, I did look for different. I did look for a virtual lab online, what was available, etc. And there's not that much accessible, in fact, and ready to use. So, and I was discovering there were quite lots of videos that could be there, but I did have the thing that videos wouldn't do the same job as a virtual lab where you virtually do your experiments. It's not the same thing. So yeah, that's the way I did go there. Yeah.
So did you have like a specific impression then when you heard the word before trying them at all? Did you have like specific thoughts, like for example, positive or negative? No, I don't want to use them. I need a real lab. Or no, actually that could solve this
No,
issue before.
I don't think I did have specific thought at the time. I think I was looking for something already, in fact, that you did have, which was a true virtual lab, like virtually pipetting your product. That's what I wanted.
Okay.
And that's what you did furnish there. Yeah.
Okay. Chris, what about you? When was the first time you heard about virtual labs, and did you have different expectations? So for example, again, you expected to find something and you didn't really try them yet. Chris, yeah.
I was preparing for my course, and of course, when the pandemic hit, everyone was looking for alternate resources. And I wasn't satisfied with a lot of the things I was seeing. There were things that were more suitable for people in primary school or secondary school, not really those in university of that level. And then when I found PraxiLabs, because my course is really an introduction to molecular work, it was great. There were modulations on DNA extraction, gel electrophoresis, PCR, all of the things that my students needed to know. So for me, it was really easy to adopt this type of approach simply because of the nature of what I taught.
That's amazing. Okay, thank you. And getting back to Carla, to get the idea again from the edtech industry and combine it with what we've been listening to now on virtual labs. Carla, you think that as the virtual labs are now progressing, I mean, do you think that it's already now good and fine, or do you think that we'll see more and quick progress in the future, different technologies, for example, like you said, mixed technology, or how you think we'll continue from here?
I think there will be more evolution. And what's quite interesting is that for a fair amount of time, the investment community in edtech and VR edtech was sort of not always very eager and quick to invest in virtual labs and VR technologies for education, because they didn't see that there would be a huge adoption. And also, one of the problems is that there are, especially if you go for the VR with the sort of all the high-end technologies, there are not really any good standards yet of interoperability with other things, and so there are still quite a lot of issues. So investors were always a bit worried about, is this really going to work in education? But of course, the pandemic has also contributed to a change of mind, and you now see a company like Labster in Denmark suddenly getting a lot of interest in Silicon Valley, which they weren't getting to that extent before. And some of the top investors in Silicon Valley have actually now invested in Labster. So there is a change of heart, there is a change of mind. How it will come into mainstream education, I can see it going much faster at higher education, where the need is obviously higher, and like Stephanie and Chris have highlighted. But I can also see that, for the democratization of education in areas where physical labs are not available, if the technology evolves and becomes cheaper, then there's a lot that can be done with this.
True. I mean, I think one of the last points you said here about democratization and like enabling equal opportunity, I think this is very, very important, and something I don't think real labs can do it, because, for example, one of the refugees organizations, like it's called Relief International, it's known globally, and they were talking to us that they have thousands of students, refugees in Jordan and places, and want to enable them to learn science. Why they cannot learn it if they don't have labs, if they don't have schools? And that was something we are very, very happy to say, yes, you can learn science even if you don't have school, or even if you don't have any resources. So I guess that's a very important point. And yeah, thank you, Carla, for mentioning this, of course. Getting back to Chris and Stephanie. So Chris, I'll start with you in this one. You think there were, as I was asking, like you had any expectations about virtual labs, but not the expectations that I'm asking about. I'm asking, did you have anything or any thoughts that you changed it after using them? So for example, you had like a hypothesis or something in mind before trying them, and then when you tried them, you found the opposite, or you found it actually right. So any expectations that changed it or that stayed as they are after really using it? Any insights after using them?
I had not expected the experience to be as interactive as it was. I didn't realize I'd actually be able to pick up the pipette, pipette it, draw a certain amount of solution. And to me, that was pretty detailed. It was far beyond the scope of what I was expecting. In the beginning, I assumed you would simply just click the arrow and it would say, all right, now it's done, next part, next start of the procedure. So that was definitely the highlight, or something that changed from my initial expectations.
Like that. What about you, Stephanie? Do you think you found something other than Chris in your expectations?
No, I think it's exactly the same thing. Like you said, just taking virtually the pipette and trying to do the experiment like that I think was great. And I do think it was even playful for the students, I would say. And this is important, because when you learn by playing, it's so much better than when it's like painful and failing truly in the lab, etc. So I think this was good for that. Really.
Like that a lot. I think I can combine both what Chris and Stephanie said, in the idea that having a balance between, we didn't want to create a game, because it's not a game, you're learning, but at the same time you are having the steps and something very interactive, so you are learning how to do the experiment, but still you're playing. So
still some pleasure.
Okay, that's amazing. So one of the most important things, Carla, we are getting a lot of questions about this one, and it's actually our last question before we go to the questions and answer session. So Carla and Stephanie and Chris, it's the question for all of you, and let's start by Carla. What do you think? So we've talked a bit about edtech, and that is started to pick up now. What do you think is going to happen in the future? So what is your expectations for the coming period, whether still we are in COVID or even after the pandemic?
Oh, that's a big question. So I think, one of the things that we shouldn't forget that the pandemic has highlighted, and it's been a discussion for years, but we sort of ignored it for a long time, especially in the Northern Hemisphere, because we didn't think it was affecting us that much, is actually the fact that there is such a digital divide. And this divide is huge. And the pandemic has amplified how big the divide is. So, and that is not just a question of poor countries not having access to the internet. That is people in rich countries not having access, or can't afford to have to buy their kids a computer, or can't have access to the internet. So that is a global problem. And I think before we can really sort of get very outlandish in our thinking, and I'd like us to get sort of really quite sort of look sort of much more evolutionary and revolutionary at times in terms of how we need to change education. We do need to address that problem at a global level, because otherwise, we will continue to have this issue. The other thing I think we need to kind of address is how this is used and how edtech is really embedded pedagogically. Like if you look at teacher education, the digital space does not feature yet in teacher education. Wherever you are in the world, there's only a few places that really address it. And then some places maybe spend like 3 hours on a course of teacher education on, using digital in the classroom. And quite often that's PowerPoint and Microsoft Word, and that's it. That is not going to work. And the same applies to the virtual labs. You have to look at how you scaffold that and how you embed that pedagogically into your lessons, so that this makes sense as a learning augmentation. There's no point in adding technology if it's not going to augment or enable you in a different way. And that is, I think, something that we have to keep in mind, and that as sort of educators, we really need to strive for. And I think, the kind of infrastructure piece, obviously as educators and people working in the sector, there's not a lot we can do about it, but there's definitely something we can do in terms of shouting at policymakers to make this happen. Because if this doesn't get resolved, that divide is just going to amplify and amplify and amplify. And rather than sort of having opportunity in learning and social mobility that comes out of education, we're actually going to go in the other direction. So that for me is the first priority we have to look at. And then we need to look at how we can make the best of technology in learning and labs and teaching.
Cannot agree more. I will keep my comment after Stephanie and Chris to let them give me their feedback as well, because I don't want to be saying the words they will say. So Stephanie, give us please your insights as well. Carla said a lot of amazing stuff. I think we are all agreeing here, but yeah, Stephanie.
Yeah, definitely agreeing 100% of what you said there. That we need to make sure we don't increase even inequality, that you want everyone to have access to the knowledge one way or the other. So virtual or even real lab, no matter what, this is a problem there. We have that problem. I don't have a solution. So I mean, yeah, but it's something that needs to be fixed and needs to be improved. The other thing I would say, I don't know if it's a thanks to COVID or because, I don't know. So we have had to go online, okay, and at least at the university here. And it means that we have had to adapt there. And by discovering this new way of teaching, I think we can improve a bit or change a bit the way we can teach, for me, biology, basically, and to try to even open up a bit more the knowledge we can distribute to the students, etc. So I think we can try to move on a bit on this way of teaching there. Yeah.
Amazing addition to what Carla said, and we'll listen now to Chris. She must have something to add here. Chris.
I agree with everything that was said. I also want to add that at least in this generation and the younger generation, technology is an ever-growing part of most people's lives, at least in my experience. And having an opportunity to do something like this enhances people's learning, especially those that I've noticed in my time teaching that there are some students who don't feel very comfortable trying to perform certain techniques in front of other people.
Yeah.
And in order for them to get that confidence or even that fundamental understanding of what they're doing, an option like this is great.
So I think Chris was adding here something that we were talking about one time before. Was one of the professors who said some of her students didn't actually feel comfortable at all going into the real lab, either shy or even scared, completely scared, because they heard or read about experiences about safety issues and was completely scared to do it. And then she had to try the virtual one first. And after kind of like experimenting like several times, and she was very confident, very motivated, then after that to really go there and, hey, nothing is going to happen because I know how the things are held. I know how it's going. I know the steps. I know everything. So she's like learning about the safety instructions in a safe environment and then going in the real lab and then trying it. I think that's a very good point, Chris. And commenting on what Stephanie and Carla said, Carla, I know that this is a huge thing, and I mean, it's a problem not only in emerging countries, but as you said, in even the rich countries and the infrastructure. You remember when we were together in the event in Dubai, they were talking a lot about infrastructure. So we cannot go and talk and try to invest in platforms and in tech tools and give them to teachers and instructors if everyone is going online to do online classes and suddenly the internet is down. So we've seen that over the year, a lot of places were struggling to go online because we are not ready yet. So I definitely agree. But as Carla said, it's not something we can do or change, but we hope we can talk, or the policymakers can listen to that and work on changing that. And then in the future, we'll be able to use these technologies and use this tech tools. And again, in the right way, as Carla mentioned, as Stephanie mentioned, to change the way we are teaching biology, we're teaching science. It's very new, and the students they are tech savvy. They are really into technology. So I think it's something they will get into STEM even more. So I completely agree with all you said, and I love the discussion. I don't want it to end, but I think we have a lot of questions, so maybe now go to the Q&A session, and let's start. So I'll try to get as much questions as possible answered, but I'll start with the with the questions in the Q&A. So here, okay, I'm trying to find the ones that we need to answer. Okay, maybe a question for VR technologies are not yet adapted, I think. Okay, so Carla, maybe you can take this question. Someone is saying if VR technologies are not yet very adapted to the current infrastructure, do you think that enhanced 360 videos can be another best solution, or there are limitations for this?
I don't think 360 video is actually a very good learning tool. It can be something that's very auxiliary, but I think we shouldn't look at it in as a comparison to, oh, we like the VR stuff, so let's have a 360-degree video, because you might as well watch a 2D video, but actually that's then sort of built with lots of kind of learning interventions in it. Video is a highly overrated learning tool. And when engaging with video, you tend to, there's about leaning forward and leaning backwards, right? A video, you tend to lean backwards. Now, if the video is embedded in a good learning construction and a pedagogical framework, it might work very well. But the way you kind of engage with information when you're just watching a video is much less focused, perhaps, than when you're dealing with an interactive animation, even of a science experiment, or trying to find Tutankhamun's tomb in the pyramid or something like that. So you learn far more from doing that than just watching a 360-degree video. And also the thing with those videos is that the novelty of them wears off very, very quickly. And what's the anchor point in that video? Unless that's sort of been really well constructed as a pedagogical tool, I don't think the value is as high as people think.
Thank you for the answers. I hope this answered the question we got. There another question is about, will we have a demo in this session? So unfortunately, we didn't prepare for a demo in this session because they wanted to, after we talked a lot about the virtual labs, they wanted to see it in person, or they wanted us to show them. So we'll definitely have this in another webinar, and I promise you I'll send the link for next webinar to have a demo, but it's not in this session yet. There are other questions not about the demo, but I think that would be missed. So that's a pretty nice question for Stephanie, I think, and Chris and Carla, all of you can definitely answer that. Something would be missed in the virtual lab is the engagement and teamwork feelings that happen in reality. So what about introducing some concepts of gamification as leaderboards to substitute this feeling? So anyone wants to start answering this?
It's true. I think if you just go with the virtual lab on the biological side, at least, I think you still need to have some experience with your true pipette, being at the bench, etc. So that's what I was saying earlier. Having like some simple experiment that can be executed in the lab for students with no safety issue, etc., would be important for them to get a feeling of how it works, etc. So yeah, I think we can't avoid that. I mean, at some point you will have to go to the true bench to be able to execute it anyway.
I'll comment after you, but let's see if Chris and Carla want to add anything. Do you want to add anything to this? How can we have teamwork or engagement in the virtual labs? Can we add some leaderboard? So Carla?
Yeah, I think there are various ways in which you can sort of set up collaborative experiments that it's not because you're working in a virtual space that you have to do it by yourself. You know, and that even applies to if you wear goggles and do experiments that way. You know, you can set up collaborative scenarios. And if you wanted to gamify it, you know, you can gamify that. I think there are places to do that, and like Stephanie said, introducing an element of play in learning is a really good thing. So that's a really good thing to do. And then there are also you know, probably situations where you might not want to have a leaderboard, because, you know, it's not about the motivation on getting, you know, being highly competitive. It's also the motivation and the intrinsic motivation of wanting to learn that we need to balance it. But I agree with Stephanie, absolutely.
Yeah, I'll add a quick thing here, Carla, because I heard this about leaderboards, especially with the younger ages. It's not something good to use, or not always. And that's why for us, for example, we didn't want to open it between different students to see their scores. But for example, for the same student, he can see when we, for example, have it integrated with the learning management system. So we want to give students the reports that say, for instance, for this experiment, you did it 10 times. So over these times, in the first time, you took this amount of time. So the time taken in the experiment, the score you got in the multiple choice questions, how many times you clicked on the helper, which is the lab partner, to help you. And then over time, if you found yourself progressing, like you said, it's intrinsic motivation, then you will see that you are really progressing and you will be motivated, rather than comparing different students to each other. So I think we are kind of adding the gamification points here, but for the student himself, not to compare him with others. So, but I like the idea, and it's something we are putting in our roadmap. We would love to look at it. It's a bit technically challenging, but as you said, Carla, we can definitely have students doing the same experiment together, because this is like called networking in Unity. So we need to have like a network, and 2 or more students can share the same experiment. So we'll definitely look into that in our roadmap, and yeah, we'd love to see that coming. That's another question here, which is, so can AR, VR be used easily in remote education? Someone is asking, so is it only an additional tool together with a physical lab, or can it be used in remote education like by itself? Chris or Stephanie or Carla, if you want anyone to answer this as well.
Well, I can give my opinion. It depends, right? If you're in a situation where you don't have the physical lab, then by default, that's what you need to do, right? I think if you do have access to a physical lab, it would be good to participate both in lab and online, depending on what you are trying to do. Again, there are some techniques that, depending on what your career path is, you should really know how to do physically, like holding a pipette. But I think a combination of the two is the best option.
Yeah, Stephanie agrees. I think Carla, you agree to that. So I think all the 4 of us here agree, because it was the question at the beginning of the question of the topic, and a lot of us answered it kind of between our answers, and we'll answer it even at the very end with the conclusion. But we all see a complementary solution here. It does not have to be only real labs or virtual labs. I think there are a lot of benefits coming from combining both of them together. So someone here is asking, okay. So someone is asking, not taking COVID-19 into consideration, would you agree that virtual labs would be more a self-learning tool? So maybe away completely from the curriculum or from the education process at all. Someone interested in STEM and just wants to use it for learning. Like, I think this is called the lifelong learning, or maybe even the distance. Carla, you want to comment on that?
I think it can, but then it also probably needs to be sort of constructed a little bit differently. Because obviously the way they tend to be used now is that if there's an intervention by a teacher or a lecturer in the lab, and then, you know, people might practice at home. But I think if you just wanted to do it by yourself, you need to make sure that you've got good resources to help you through that process. Otherwise, just having the tools is not going to help you progress your learning. So that there needs to be like a a special version, if you want, for independent learning. But I think it's definitely possible to take you to a certain level. And if no other tools are available to you, then why not? But I certainly would recommend that you then check in with people who are also in the know-how to make sure that what you're learning and what you think you're learning is the right thing.
Really right.
Yeah,
I like that. And I think we are trying to make our platform more than just an experiment, as you said, Carla, what to add to it. So we have like kind of like a multimedia place that they have inside the platform. So before getting into the experiment, we try to tell students that even if they miss the lecture, or as a revision for the lecture, we have like a PDF, you can revise your lab manual and the steps. We have a video that explains the experiment and shows every step. So why do you do a DNA extraction? This is the first step, this is the second, this is the third, and show the students. So we try to actually kind of complement it. Of course, it's not like you have your instructor or professor explaining it, but it's kind of trying to complement some material before the experiment, and then after the experiment we get them to the multiple choice questions to assess themselves. So as you said, try to have it more of like a lesson rather than only an experiment. So we can take another question for this.
Can I just say something in response?
Sure.
Those PDFs are very detailed. For people who aren't familiar with them, I've read them. It really does help explain why you're doing exactly what you're doing, especially if you're doing some kind of chemical type work.
Thank you for the addition, Chris. So, because Chris here has used our labs, so she knows them well. So she's explaining them. She can explain them more better than me, I'm sure, and we'll love to show it to you in a demo later on. Someone is asking for biological sciences, where you need to demonstrate feeding a lab animal or administering an agent to a rat in an experiment. Is there a virtual lab that can exhibit such a demonstration? Can this scenario be created virtually? And if you can do that. So, I mean, if any one of you can want to talk about if this from the scientific part, and then I can talk about it from the technical part, but if anyone wants to talk about the scientific, can we do that virtually? Is it enough that the student learns it in a virtually? They have to do it really in a real lab?
I would guess this would be a way to get familiar with the experiments. I would say that. I mean, to see what would be the different step, how to the key points for the experiments. I think it would be, but at the end of the day, you will have to go through the true experiments, especially if you want to be trained to handle animal, etc. You will have to go there, no matter what, to understand what it is and what it feels like. So I think, yeah.
You need to handle that.
Yeah, I don't see this being removed. Yeah, you can visualize it, but then you need to do it to understand all the points, etc.
Yeah. This was exactly what I was going to say. We have one of our experiments in biology. I'm not a biologist myself, so I cannot remember its name, but it's one of the experiments. We have a rat, and they actually give it like put a syringe in it. So I know that we have some experiments in our portfolio that can do that. So technically, I was going to say, technically speaking, it's doable and it's feasible. But again, as Stephanie said, because it's an animal and you may have to see exactly what's happening and hold it, it needs to be, as we said, at least complemented with a real lab. It doesn't have to be one way or another. So that was another question. And okay, I'm just trying to quickly go through the chat here because it's a lot of things written under each other. So going through them now to make sure that we didn't miss anything. Okay. A lot of people are saying hello to every one of you here, guys. So a lot of people are saying hello to the speakers and they enjoyed the discussion. Hello from different places. There are a lot of our countries here from different places. There are Pakistan, there's US, Colombia, there are a lot from Colombia as well, Greece, and yeah, I think we are answered almost the most questions. Some of them are repeated now, but other than the ones I've seen so far, if I'm just talking to the audience, if you think that we've missed any of your questions, please send it to us, and we'll definitely, I can even get you the answers from our experts and send it back to you. But so far, I cannot see anything more in the chat boxes. It's repeated questions. So I'm very excited and very happy with having you guys today. It was very, very insightful for me myself. I've listened to lots of things I didn't know before. So thank you, Stephanie, Chris, and Carla, for your participation and sharing your knowledge. And the last thing I would ask you, if you have any kind of like takeaway message, do you think you want to give people a takeaway message about our, like a conclusion of the webinar today? Just one message as a takeaway. Who do we start with?
For me, the takeaway is that, you know, and I think we all agree on this, is that, you know, it's about both. It's about virtual and real. And it's always going to be about both. Even, you know, if things get really, really sophisticated, holding a rat whilst you have to do an experiment, you know, no matter how wonderful the haptic feedback might be on a virtual experiment, an animal has certain behaviors that are often very unpredictable as well. It can bite you, it can, you know, and in a virtual environment, you might sort of be able to cater for some of these behaviors, but you can't necessarily cater for the thing that's suddenly unexpected, which I'm sure people working with animals have a lot of experience of. And so it has to remain a world of both, because we need to be in the real world as well.
Thank you, Carla.
Yeah, I definitely agree 100%. Yeah, I think it will be both now. And I think we could even now think of the virtual lab for the teaching to be an add-on, definitely.
Yeah. Thank you, Stephanie, for adding that as well. Chris?
I can't imagine what the semester would have looked like if I didn't have this opportunity or this resource, especially in these times. It was a great tool for my students, and I do believe it helped them understand the concepts.
Thank you for adding that as well. So I don't have anything more to add to what Chris, Stephanie, and Carla said. The same opinion. We ourselves, when we talk to any professor or university, we don't ever say we are replacing real labs, because we cannot do that. At least now with the technology we have at hand, we are complementing real labs. The real labs have benefits. They have the ability to let students use their senses until we are able to do that with some technology in the future, maybe mixed technology. I think we are complementing real labs. We are adding a lot about students using it anytime, like at night or during the day, anytime. There is no constraint on safety, on cost, on accessing it from anywhere in the world. And again, we are all about, I think most of us talk today about enabling students and even educators around the world having equal opportunity rather than just the kind of the gap, as Carla mentioned before. So thank you all for attending. Thanks the audience for attending, and for our panelists. I appreciate having you here today with us, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, and see you in another webinar. Thank you. Bye.